Okay, everybody, I think we're ready to start.
Yeah.
There we go. I'd like to welcome everybody to this. This seems so odd with everybody back there. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Sustainability Advisory Board meeting tonight on Monday, May 7th. Thank you to the council members who are joining us for this workshop. We really appreciate it. We do have quorum, and the first thing I need to ask is if anyone here has public comment other than our presenters. Okay, see none. We'll go on to the approval of the minutes from March 5th, which was our last meeting. I would accept a motion to approve those minutes.
So move.
Second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, with the approval of the minutes, let's say aye.
All right.
Aye. And then we're going to go right on to our wonderful classes that are here tonight. So, Misty, do you want to do an introduction for us, or do the students take away? Or?
I can.
I'm happy to.
It'll be kind of impromptu, I guess. But so thanks everybody for coming. As some of you know, we've been working with the SAB's been working with Professor Misty McPhee's Environmental Studies Senior Seminar class. This is the latest in a long line of collaborative efforts between the city and the university, and we've been pleased to have them. It's been a great pleasure working with all of you. I got to see a trial run of the presentations, and so it was exciting to see that, and thank you all for coming in for that a few weeks back, and looking forward to seeing the final product.
Well, before they go, I would like to thank
We do have to ask you to come up to the microphone, please. We're not live on the air, but we are recording this for posterity.
Before the
you.
students begin, I would just like to thank in particular Stephen and Margie for all the amazing support and help they've given us this semester and in previous semesters. But we couldn't have done this without you, so thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. We love working with you.
And with that,
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Cody Van Oss. Behind me is Joey Stammer. To start things off, we're going to just introduce why we're here. Stephen kind of explained everything pretty well, so we'll just jump right into it. So at the beginning of the semester, our professor, Missy McPhee, met with Stephen Wiley and John Ferris to talk about how our class can address stormwater management issues within the city of Oshkosh. So our class decided to split up into 4 different groups. We decided to split up into, here's the clicker, 4 groups: landscaping, shorelines, permeable pavement, and parking lot design. We decided to perform a green infrastructure audit on the Oshkosh municipal codes and the ordinances to try and look at some recommendations we could possibly come up with to better stormwater management issues within Oshkosh.
Okay, so as you heard Cody say, you're going to be hearing from 4 different groups today presenting. And before we begin with that, it's important that we're all familiar with the term sustainability. And this is something you're going to be hearing a lot over the presentation, and it simply means our goal is to develop solutions that are environmentally friendly, affordable, and politically and socially feasible. Here, you're going to see an outline that each group is going to follow. So first, they're going to provide some background information about what they're going to be talking about. Second, they're going to give you a recommendation up front. They're going to tell you what they believe, or we believe, the city should implement. Then we're going to follow that up with some supporting evidence. We're going to look at stakeholders from other similar communities. Then we're going to look at stakeholders, which are people that are invested in this issue. Then we're going to look at case studies from similar communities. And then next, we're going to look at barriers and cost benefits of our solutions, discuss how this is important for sustainability overall. And then during our summary, we're going to reiterate the recommendation that we provided to you at the beginning of our group presentation. So without further ado, here's the landscaping group.
All right, everyone, we are the landscaping group. My name is Hannah Holshoe. This is Caitlin Ellenbrook, Ben Slusser, Lexi Offenbeck, and Grant Zwig. So first, I'm going to talk about a little bit of background. So there's a large portion of Oshkosh is paved and we are prone to flooding. And runoff issues have created problems for our surrounding water bodies. And there are some areas within Oshkosh that are considered brown sites, which means they're contaminated with different chemical pollutants. And this is a map that I made on Google Earth Pro. It is an overlaid with NRCS soil data, and then each individual yellow line indicates a different soil series, and every different soil series requires or presents different issues for landscaping techniques that we're going to go into. A continuation of the background is our point system that we're going to talk about in Article 9, Section 30, titled Landscaping Requirements. So for public and commercial land, a required number of points is required to meet the minimum. There's also no max, and for the minimum is just to be acceptable, and then points are awarded per landscaping technique, which will be addressed in further presentations.
All right. Landscaping techniques we would like to implement within parking lots are bioswales and rain gardens. And within the rain gardens and bioswales, we would like to use native plants more frequently. On the right side is a picture of a bioswale. We would like to implement this more on Main Street or on streets. And then within parking lots, we would like to use rain gardens. A bioswale, the water filters in through the top vegetation layer and down through the soil and then into the chamber area. That way it can slowly infiltrate through and has time to capture it instead of all just running off. And then native plants have evolved with the ecosystem, so we believe that they are better to use. Benefits of native plants include they use less water, less maintenance. You don't have to use pesticides, they increase biodiversity, and they have deep roots to hold soil together. So for our recommendation, we want to add a requirement for new construction only. We would like to encourage this for existing structures, and private land is excluded, but we highly encourage this. So our first recommendation is Article 9, Section 30, 253, Item 2 in paved areas. For paved areas, we want to alter the current plan from 40% of shrubbery to 40% native shrubs only. Our second recommendation is in Article 9, Section 30, 255, Item 3, street frontages. Within street frontages, the minimum of 50% of all points are devoted to decorative and medium trees, and we want to change this to 30% native trees and a minimum of 30% must be deep-rooted native grasses. We believe that native plants are better to manage stormwater because of their deep roots, and we would think that would be better than just the 50% of all points to the medium trees. And our last recommendation is in Article 9, Section 30, 255, which is Item 3, street frontages. Oops, sorry. Item 2, which is required parts A. So the current plan is bioswales and rain gardens get 20 points per 20 square feet area and cannot exceed 100 points. Our recommendation is to have 30 points per bioswale and rain garden per the 20 square feet area and with no point limit to hopefully encourage the use of bioswales and rain gardens.
All right, so looking at our first stakeholder, we went to Northeast Wisconsin Water, which is located up in Green Bay. This is a water treatment plant. We met with Bruce Bartell, a district director there, and we discussed adaptive management and interconnected watershed network. With this, they wanted to reduce the overall phosphorus limits that they are facing in their water treatment. And we wanted to look at how Oshkosh could address our problems here to help them down the river. And overall, they partnered also with Fox Wolf Watershed Alliance to work as a whole for the watershed and create better water quality in general for the whole watershed.
right, our next stakeholder is Stephen Wiley. As you know, he is the assistant planner for the city of Oshkosh. He was important to meet with because he gave us community insight on how the community reacts to some of the landscaping techniques that we want to implement. He gave an example of the Millers Bay Shoreline Restoration Project. Our next group, the Shorelines group, will go a little bit more into the barriers and some of the success that they saw with that restoration project. But then he also suggested the old Pioneer Inn location as a future restoration site. So Oshkosh is a green tier community, is a tree city, and also has high flyer status through Bird City. All is important because it shows that we are dedicated to being green, and implementing some of these landscaping techniques is going to be more accepted within the city of Oshkosh. So the first city that we examined is the city of Prairie Crossing in Illinois. We chose this city because they have a similar community, similar ecosystem, and overall landscape as the city of Oshkosh. How they reduce their stormwater runoff and improve the water quality of that runoff is through their stormwater treatment train system. So the success that they saw with that is that their peak runoff was reduced by over 60%, and their total annual runoff was reduced by up to 75%, which is pretty amazing. How they did this is they restored 200 acres of wetland and prairie. This might be a little bit excessive for the city of Oshkosh, but it still shows what a good example and how effective this could be. So they put a buffer around their lake, which served as a detention and biological treatment, holding the soil together and filtering any pollutants that did run off into the lake. And then they used native plants throughout the city and also in their bioswales and rain gardens, which is how they saw this amazing success. They educated their citizens through the use of events, newsletters, and then giving new homeowners a guidebooks on what kind of plants they should be planting and overall how to be green.
All right, another case study we looked at was in New York City, and they implemented bioswales in the year 2011. They studied 10 bioswales during 185 rain events from the spring of 2011 to the summer of 2011. On the left column of the table is rainfall in inches. So when they received below 1 inch of rain, the mean of the 10 bioswales was 73%. 1 to 2 inches of rainfall, the mean capture rate was 25%, and above 2 inches of rainfall resulted in 14%. So when a lot of water comes in, it's hard for it to retain it all, but below 1 inch, they have a very high mean percentage, so this goes for a total of 59% capture rate in bioswales.
So looking at some of the main barriers that we were addressing, the first off was a lack of legislative mandate. A solution for this was using grassroots efforts to garner support for ordinances and legislation. The second barrier we looked at was lack of funding and effective market incentives. And so we looked at examples for the point source system, which would give points to people, and that'd be a market incentive for citizens. The last point we looked at was resistance to change. And to beat this, we would educate and engage the community through demonstrations. So looking at cost of some of this green infrastructure, so looking at bioretention, do-it-yourself prices were around $1 to $5 per square foot average. Professional was $10 to $40 per square foot average, and these numbers were from the Rain Guard Alliance in 2018. So looking at an example of this, so we have 250-foot square planter islands and 125-foot square planter islands. So looking at the prices from the previous slide, minimum would be $2,500 for a minimum, $10,000 for the maximum, and for the smaller rain garden, 125 square foot, it'd be $1,250 for the minimum and $5,000 for the maximum. So looking at some of these benefits that these bioretentions could provide, so it'd be reduced infrastructure cost, lower maintenance, chemical pollution reduction, protection from flooding, wildlife habitat for birds and butterflies, and overall cost-effective stormwater management.
right, so while improving the stormwater management in the city of Oshkosh, we also want to make sure that we're being sustainable in each of the 3 areas that Joey had mentioned earlier. The first being social sustainability. With social sustainability, we're being sustainable by increasing human well-being and health in general. By improving the health of the ecosystem, we're also taking out pollutants in the air, water, and in the soil, which then transfers into human health as well. We're also being socially sustainable by improving the appearance of the city, which will encourage cohesiveness and inclusion as people are more encouraged to do well for their community and in their community. We also want to make sure that we're being economically sustainable. And this means that we'll be saving money with the green infrastructure and landscaping features that we recommend. Green infrastructure is less expensive than gray infrastructure. And the graph on the right shows a case from New York City. On the y-axis, you see cost in billions of dollars. And on the x-axis, you see the green strategy and the gray strategy. On the bottom portion of each bar graph is the light gray portion, which represents cost-effective gray infrastructure. And this would likely be maintained if the city was to implement green infrastructure practices in the city. On the top right bar graph, you see a darker gray portion. That is the cost-ineffective gray infrastructure that will be replaced with cost-effective green infrastructure features. And on the top left are those cost-effective green infrastructure features. And in this particular case, New York saw a savings of about $1.5 billion. Now, of course, that is more than Oshkosh would likely see in their budget, but the fact remains that the savings are there for the city. It also helps bring in money. It brings in new residents who want to raise their families and live in a clean environment, and it also brings in businesses who want to conduct their business in a clean and healthy city. Finally, it is environmentally sustainable. The deep-rooted plants encourage soil health by limiting the amount of erosion through storms and stormwater runoff. The native plants also increase biodiversity by improving the ecosystem health and making the ecosystem more resilient to disease, invasive species, and other such factors that could be harmful to it. And lastly, more vegetation leads to a cleaner and urban environment by once again removing those pollutants in the soil, water, and in the air as well.
And then lastly, in summary, our stakeholders see a value and want Oshkosh to pursue these changes, especially Bruce Bartel, who sees the value in Oshkosh making these changes for the water that comes to his wastewater plant. And then what's holding us back is a legislative mandate, resistance to change, and a lack of funding. And then our overall recommendation is to change the point system in the landscaping requirements ordinance in the 3 areas, including street frontages, paved areas, bioswales, and rain gardens. And this all relates to parking and parking lot design, because this is the easiest place to implement landscaping techniques in the parking lots where stormwater issues are most prevalent. And next we'll hear from our Shorelines team.
Hello, we are the Shorelines group. I am Natalie Kosman. This is Kenzie Knox, Amanda Peterson, and Courtney Craighead. So to start, we'll have 2 pictures. The top picture is an example of an unhealthy shoreline. It was actually taken by a group member of ours of Menominee Park here in the city of Oshkosh. The bottom picture is an example of a healthy shoreline that includes a vegetative buffer zone. A buffer zone is a natural strip of vegetation that starts in the water source and continues on a terrestrial land. Over time, development disrupts shoreline vegetation. Without this vegetation, erosion from runoff destroys the shoreline and it starts to look like the above picture. When this happens, we tend to see decreased water quality, loss of aquatic and terrestrial habitat, and lower property value. For an example, in Menominee Park, runoff from parking lots, roads, and other impervious materials can increase erosion and lead to the unhealthy shoreline that you see above. As of right now, vegetative buffer zones are not required by the city of Oshkosh. They are mentioned in the landscaping ordinance for riverfront mixed use. That does not require plants to be directly on the shoreline but near the yard. Even though it is not required, the Parks Department and other organizations have worked on some projects here in Oshkosh, including Millers Bay and South Park, that we will touch on later in the presentation.
So for our recommendation, we are requiring that Oshkosh meet the countywide buffer requirement of 35-foot depth on city land. We found through our research that 35 feet provides the most benefits for water quality without impeding too much on the land. And for private property, we would like to require that they meet a 25-foot depth because we realize that 35 feet on private property is a lot and not necessarily achievable. In order to encourage people to implement these buffer zones, we'd like to start an incentive program, and that begins with the point system that our landscaping group touched on earlier. In addition to that, we are providing a give and take program as well. So for property owners that cannot implement the full 25 or 35-foot depth, they can implement a 10-foot buffer zone, and in addition to several of the green infrastructure practices that we talked about earlier, including bioswales or rain gardens. And moving on to stakeholders. Starting off, we spoke to several stakeholders with the City Parks Department, including Bill Sturm and Ray Maurer. Currently in progress with Oshkosh, there is a restoration project in South Park, currently under construction. The goal with that is to implement buffer zones around the waterways in South Park to help prevent erosion and help with stormwater management. And then there's also the Millers Bay project that started in 2010 that implemented native grasses, and their goal was to implement a buffer zone of 35-foot depth with tall native grasses. However, they did face some barriers with some of the citizens of Oshkosh, especially the landowners directly on the water. And they came to a conclusion that they were going to implement shorter grasses in order to still have the same effect on water quality without impeding on the view of the landowners. And next, moving on to our private landowners, we spoke to Kevin Crawford, who is a professor at University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Mr. Crawford recognizes that we do have an erosion issue in Oshkosh and is very supportive of green infrastructure practices. However, he does not think that 35 feet is achievable, especially on private land, which is why we are recommending the 25-foot on private land. We also spoke to an anonymous landowner who has spoken out against shoreline restoration projects in the past, not for buffer zones whatsoever. This is because of the assumptions that they have about them, including that they will obstruct the view on their property, that they will raise taxes, require more maintenance, and they're not aesthetically pleasing. However, they have these assumptions. They are willing to learn more and potentially change their view.
Okay, so next I will talk about two case studies that our group focused on. The first was the Northern Highland Lake District, which is located in northern Wisconsin. They did a study of 12 different lake ecosystems and surrounding communities, and their overall conclusion is that vegetation cover is incredibly important, especially in regards to regulating temperatures in aquatic and terrestrial environments. And the second case study is an international one, which is focused in Xiamen Reservoir in Taiwan. Their overall conclusion was that larger buffer zones are overall more effective, especially in eliminating pollutants. And then they recommend that all areas do their own cost-benefit analysis in order to determine suitable buffer zone lengths.
Throughout our research, our group has identified some barriers we would like to address. The first would be some perceived costs. As Courtney mentioned before, our anonymous landowner did express concern over taxes being raised due to the implementation of shoreline restoration projects. Our group would like to emphasize that the funds would not come from taxes being raised, but by other funds that we will mention later in the presentation. There is also concern over the maintenance needs of the buffer zones. And our research has found that buffer zones require less time and labor over the long run compared to regular turf grass. The public also pushed back against the Millers Bay restoration project because the tall native grasses block their waterfront views. When this happened, the tall grasses were replaced with shorter grasses that still had the same effectiveness that the taller grasses did have. So the residents were able to enjoy their waterfront view while the shorelines were able to still be effectively cleaned. This is okay.
While he's working on, oh, he's got it, okay, do it later.
Okay, let's go. Almost there.
Whoops.
All right. So after looking at all these barriers, our group thought that after talking to our stakeholders, we found that education is key to overcoming these perceived barriers through partnership through UW Extension and Wisconsin DNR. Education access could be able to the public.
So taking a look at costs, the Maryland Cooperative Extension estimated that it would be about $218 to $729 per acre to implement and maintain shoreline buffer zones. Here in Millers Bay, they spent approximately $6,000 to implement the buffer zones there. And when you do the calculations, it turns out that that was about $240 per acre that was spent there. And so that's on the low end of the Maryland estimate. Another thing we can take a look at are DNR grants. There are several DNR grants that are related specifically to stormwater management and cleaning up our rivers and lakes. So if the city of Oshkosh applies for these grants, they can use that money to install and maintain buffer zones. And they can also use that money for other projects that are going on in Oshkosh, like permeable pavements and landscaping, the other things that we're talking about here tonight. So looking at significance for sustainability, we'll start with environment. Buffer zones can improve water quality, they make for healthier ecosystems, and they control erosion. In the picture along the side, there is a scale in feet that shows the depth of the roots. Turf grass, which is typically seen along shorelines, has a very, very short root system, and that's not going to stabilize the shore. But if you look at the three native grasses that are pictured, they have root systems that go several feet into the ground, and so that's going to make for a very stable shore that won't have a lot of erosion. When you look at economy, having shoreline buffer zones can increase property value because it increases the quality of the water. And for society, buffer zones improve community health. So to summarize, we talked to several stakeholders, and for the most part, they were all on board with shoreline buffer zones, and when they weren't, they were willing to learn more about them. We looked at other locations that have had success with shoreline buffer zones. We determined that barriers can be overcome through education. We saw how they are sustainable in all three pillars. And to relate it back to parking lots, by placing a shoreline buffer zone along the shore, for example, in Menominee Park, where there currently is not one, that could reduce the runoff that is coming from the parking lots and roads that are in that area. So to go over our recommendation one more time, we would like to have a 35-foot buffer for city property, a 25-foot buffer for private property, and we would like to have an incentive program to get everyone on board. So we will now hear from the permeable pavement group.
Okay, so the permeable pavement, my name's Taylor Jansen. This is Wyatt Zeringer, Cody Van Noss, and Mitchell Fierseth. And then to give you some background about the issue comes with impervious, right? We're seeing issues across the entire country, and this includes Oshkosh. We're seeing some downstream flooding, high turbidity, bank erosion, and habitat destruction. And we'll learn that it turns into issues for our sewer systems as we talk with James Rabe. And we'll also see a few examples of Oshkosh using permeable pavers already. Then to give you a brief overview of what the issue is, we have impervious pavement here, and we're looking at a 1.7 inch rain event. And when it hits this impervious parking lot over here, we have a catch basin. And again, it hits the impervious concrete sidewalk and hits the which goes to a catch basin, and it doesn't get into the soil where it can maybe filter a bit and recharge groundwater. And then in addition, it runs extremely quick down slopes into this creek where we'll have increased runoff and more issues with like fertilization and pollution into the creek in that matter. Now we look at the same 1.7 inch rain event with pervious concretes or permeable pavers. And we see that in all cases at the concrete sidewalk and the parking lot, we're seeing water get into the groundwater and recharge that groundwater, and it doesn't put as much stress on your buffer zone because your runoff of your storm isn't as quick as it might be if you do have impervious pavements.
So our recommended ordinance, we recommend adding Article 7 titled Best Management Practices in Chapter 14 of Stormwater Management Ordinance. So best management practices are mentioned throughout the ordinance, but they're kind of just spread out. So we feel like adding all the best management practices in one article would make it much more easy to follow. And also permeable pavements are not mentioned at all. So we'd like it to explicitly mention permeable pavements. And we'd also like it to require at least 20% of parking lot surfaces to be permeable pavement in new construction. So in the zoning ordinance, it says that no more than 70% of a surface should be impermeable. So by requiring 20%, that'll help places stay under that 70% threshold. And this will only apply to off-street parking areas that accommodate 5 or more vehicles. So we're really looking to attack the larger parking surfaces and not so much smaller residential areas.
So in order to gauge how the city of Oshkosh views permeable pavements, we decided to talk to James Rabe, who is the Director of Public Works at Oshkosh, and also to get some perspective on permeable pavements, we talked to Doug Buck, who is the President of Pave Drain. When we first talked to James Rabe, he mentioned that stormwater infiltration is a major issue within Oshkosh. This results in a lot of sewer system failures, which can affect flooding within the streets and also sewer system leaking into residential basements. This is obviously an issue that we want to address, and we feel that permeable pavements could help with this. When we talked to Doug Buck, again, he's the president of Pave Drain. Pave Drain is a block system. It's a type of permeable pavement, permeable pavers. We actually have already seen that Oshkosh has used Pave Drain. They've used it in downtown Oshkosh YMCA, the Menominee National Arena, Oshkosh Senior Center, and Oshkosh Fire Station number 16. He said that the implementation of permeable pavers and permeable pavement within Oshkosh is very achievable, and that Oshkosh is already pretty willing to do this, seeing as that they have already implemented some in some key locations.
So first, we'd like to talk about our case study, which was in Burnsville, Minnesota. We chose this because Burnsville is relatively the same size. It's a little bit smaller than Oshkosh. And it also has the same climate. So that is a test to the perceived barrier of cold weather being an issue with these types of systems. And we've seen from other countries Canada has used them, as well as cities like Burnsville and Minnesota. So they have a strategy, or 4-strategy process, and I'll be talking to you about 2 of them today. Their first strategy is to promote infiltration and water quality protection. They do this in a number of ways. They have found that rain gardens are very effective in their city. And they also like to use low impact development, and they have short-term and long-term goals, which is where permeable pavements fit in. Now, they don't have a requirement for permeable pavements in their city, but they use them in frequently used parking lots, which fits into their short-term, which is newly constructed developments. And they hope to get into more long-term solutions, which are already existing developments. And the short video on the bottom right-hand corner is a parking lot from the city where they used 300 gallons of water and pumped it on top, and it all ran off through, actually, down into the catch basin underneath, back into their groundwater. So this is a short video. The entire video can be found on YouTube or on the City of Burnsville's website. And their second strategy is through education and stewardship. Now, sustainability in the City of Burnsville, they want to be a guide going forward, but they want to construct a culture of sustainability with their residents. And by doing this, the city no longer has to be that guide and driving force to be sustainable. People will just want to be sustainable on their own, making it easier to implement projects like permeable pavements or rain gardens or buffer zones or parking lot redesign, like you'll be hearing about later. And they also do extensive work with their public school systems and elementary schools and getting education out early. And by that builds a community culture of sustainability. And they also offer grants and incentive projects or incentive assistance to residents that want to implement innovative projects, which is something the city of Oshkosh could also look into. And we're going to talk about cost here. Now, this is 3 types of pavement: porous asphalt, pervious concrete, and permeable pavers. Next, you have their applications. Porous asphalt would be a low weight capacity, so a smaller parking lot or one that isn't used as frequently. Pervious concretes can be used on small to large projects, which do hold more weight, which could be a frequently used parking lot. And pavers, also large and small projects that can hold a substantial amount of weight. Next is installation cost per square feet. So we see the cheapest is the porous asphalt at about $1.11 a square foot. Pervious concrete's about $6.66 a square foot. And permeable pavers at about $11.10. And the last section of this table talks about lifespan. Now we'd look at the porous asphalt has a lifespan of about 17 and a half years, and the next pervious concrete 25, and permeable pavers 25 to 30. Now they see longer lifespans than expected because they don't fall to that frost heave action where water is allowed to pass through the pavement and does not get caught and does not freeze and expand, causing cracks, which is where we see a lot of the extra cost for a regular asphalt or pavement, which will be seen in this table, which looks at a half-acre parking lot cost over 25 years. Now, these numbers were found through a study at UC Davis, and over a 25-year frequency, we see that permeable pavements do have a more expensive upfront cost, but each pavement has specific maintenance requirements, and that's where we see a lot of the cost for standard asphalts. Now, vacuum sweeping does occur for maintenance, they say at least 3 to 4 times a year, and restoring permeability, which occurs about roughly 5 times according to the study. Now we look at the asphalt, you see a lot of seal coating and stripping and overall replacement of surface. Now a lot of that cost comes in that frost heave, especially in our cold climate where water can get into the cracks and causes a lot of these patches and strippings that need to be added. And then now we'll talk about some of the barriers.
So some of the barriers associated with permeable pavements, there's a higher upfront initial installation cost, but even though it does have a higher initial cost, you can save money in areas such as the underground piping for drainage under the surfaces, and also just other stormwater systems. And there's also maintenance can be a barrier, so clogging. So the permeable pavements can be prone to clogging from sand or clay or other small particles. So to ensure that it doesn't clog and become impervious, it's recommended that they are went over with industrial vacuums and sweepers at least once a year, and also snow removal with maintenance. So the common problem is maybe like people are afraid that a plow will, especially with permeable pavement pavers. A plow will hit the paver and just rip it out of the ground. So that can happen, but to combat that, replacing the front edges of the plows for the metal and replace it with rubber or plastic would definitely decrease the damage caused. And also a perceived barrier is climate. So we're calling that a perceived barrier because there's a common misconception that permeable pavements don't perform well in colder climates. But in reality, the freezing actually does not affect the infiltration of the permeable pavements. So they're actually more resistant to frost heave, as you've heard. And they also require less de-icing throughout the winter season, so that's less salt that has to be thrown down.
So next to talk about the significance for sustainability in relation to permeable pavements. Again, we're going to touch on the 3 pillars of sustainability like the last 2 groups did. First, when it comes to the environment, as mentioned before, permeable pavements really help in the reduction of runoff and pollutants. It helps the pollutants that come with runoff filter through and filter into the soils at a more natural rate than if they would run off directly into sewer systems or into water bodies. In relation to economy, permeable pavements can eliminate excess costs on other best management practices. They definitely are being able to use permeable pavements on a parking lot that is already there reduces the cost to use excess space for other best management practices. And then looking at society, the reduction of flooding in basements is something that permeable pavements can definitely help with, along with some of the permeable pavers. You can use different colors that can be aesthetically pleasing to some residents. Then to wrap up our recommendation, we would like to add Article 7 titled Best Management Practices in Chapter 14 of the Stormwater Management Ordinance. And again, this would require at least 20% of parking lot surfaces to be permeable pavement. And like we said before, this would only focus on parking lots currently yet to be constructed, or if there's a parking lot that's going to be redone to then implement these permeable pavements. And again, only applying to off-street parking areas that accommodate 5 or more vehicles. So next you will hear from our design group.
Thank you, guys. We are the design group. My name is Brandon Flins. Here we have Martha Hill, Joey Stammer, and Eric Hoff. So for a little bit of a background, our plan is to implement other groups' recommendation into simply parking lots. The status quo as it sits now, depending on the size of the lot, there's a certain number of points for the point system that the other 3 groups have talked about. There's required of them. It is 40 to 50 points per 10 stalls or per 10,000 square feet of the parking lot. 30% of which needs to be tall trees, and 40% needs to be shrubs. So our recommendation for the city of Oshkosh is to replace regular planter islands, which are currently in most parking lots, with either bioswales or rain gardens, as landscaping team discussed. We would also like to raise the required points per 10 stalls or per 10,000 square feet for urban mixed use parking lots from 40 to 50, and then for the central mixed use and for the riverfront mixed use parking lots from 50 to 60 points. The other thing we would like to do is we would also like to create a minimum requirement for permeable pavements for parking lots. These are for parking lots that have more than 5 spaces, as was discussed by the pavements team.
Can you just talk a little more, I'm sorry, about your increasing the points per 10 stalls?
So currently, as it stands, there is a certain amount of points that each parking lot has to meet. Depending on how big they are, again, it's either measured by number of stalls or by area. Currently, as it sits, they need 40 points for every 10 stalls or for every 10,000 feet that the size of the parking lot is. And those points need to be different landscaping pieces like those tall trees, shrubs, or native plants or non-native plants that they can put in.
So a couple of the stakeholders that we spoke to about parking lot design, we spoke to Daniel Schroeder, the manager at Oshkosh Best Western. We also spoke to Sarah Larson, the owner of Wagner Market, and Ben Renner, the owner of Winnebago Bicycle. Daniel Schroeder, some of the comments that he made about parking lot redesign and implementation of either buffer zones or additional native plants. He said that they would not want to implement buffer zones because we do have the boardwalk right by the Best Western downtown, and the customers would not like the obstruction of the water. They enjoy the sights of the water when they walk down that path. They do feel encouraged to use additional native plants around the other landscapings that they can implement. Daniel Schroeder is the only stakeholder that we spoke to that does experience significant parking restraints, especially in the summer. In the summer, they compete for parking spaces with both boat cruises on the lake and other restaurants and businesses that use the same parking lots. So he felt that to combat this, in the parking garage that they actually use, to look at vertical gardens to mitigate the runoff from that garden. And he also said he was interested in learning about permeable pavements along the river to limit the amount of pollutants that are running into the river. Sarah Larson and Ben Rennert actually share the same parking lot. This is the back lot that Ms. Larson owns. It is designated as a brown site, so it is contaminated with different chemicals. So she was very concerned about if they are different requirements, if she would get funding to redo her parking lot. Both of these stakeholders mentioned that there is sufficient parking unless there is an event downtown or the farmer's market. They did not see a problem with this. They said that they enjoy the limited parking because it encourages people to walk downtown and actually experience downtown and feel a part of the community. Sarah Larson said that she would love to incorporate native plants into her parking lot. You can see that her parking lot is pretty bare. There's a lot of black space, so she's encouraged to use more tall trees to mitigate the heat island effect from the black surface. Mr. Renard said that although they are parking downtown, that the signs directing people to the parking lots are at minimum, and people are confused on where to park.
Okay, so in order to address especially some of the spatial restrictions that Daniel Schroeder mentioned to us, we decided that it would be a good idea to look at how other cities dealing with stormwater management have managed parking efficiency. And so our first our first case study that we looked at was in New York City, New York. In 2007, they were trying to maximize parking lot efficiency while minimizing the impacts on commercial facilities. And some of the solutions they came up with were using stormwater retention cells and natural filters. On the top row there, those 4 pictures are from New York City and some of the installations that they have made. You can see some of the bioswales and the native plants that the landscaping group was talking about there. Our second case study was from Minnetonka, Minnesota, which is a nearby smaller community. And they, in 2013, were also doing very much what we're doing here, which is looking at other communities near them to see how they are improving parking efficiency. And they were able to identify some of the strengths and weaknesses of their community. And from that, they decided to use more filter vegetation and porous surfaces. And our final case study kind of addresses that perceived barrier that the permeable pavement group talked about when it comes to cold weather and precipitation, mainly rain and snow. The perceived barrier being that permeable pavements don't function properly in these conditions. But as we can see, they were able to increase landscaping and pervious areas, which means that they were the surfaces were unaffected by the climate.
All right, some of the barriers that our group came up with were maintenance. During certain parts of the year and seasons, you might have to hire a few extra people to take care of the bioswales and such, as they're going to need cleaning. the public perception on more green space, like there's no, the community doesn't benefit from it. The disturbance, which would be the actual construction of the parking lots, and people are gonna have to park other places, so it's kind of an inconvenience. And then like we went over before with the pavement group, the initial cost of implementing some of these things are gonna be a bit higher. Along with costs, it's the cost of permeable surfaces are more, as well as construction isn't always cheap. And again, potentially hiring people to maintain bioswales. And one of the bigger issues would be the reduced number of parking spaces. But this graph is kind of showing the Oshkosh parking trends. It was done by Wagner Parking Consultants. And along the left-hand side, you have the number of parking spaces that is provided in Oshkosh. Along the bottom is the certain times of the day where people are parking. And the different colors are showing the different kind of parking you have throughout Oshkosh and how much or how many of the spaces are being used. And we see that throughout most of the day, all parking spaces are never being used. It's hardly half. So Oshkosh does have some parking spaces that we could potentially lose. Some of the benefits of these parking lots, it could also reduce maintenance costs because you are going to have to hire some extra people, but the green infrastructure is cheaper in the long run, especially when it comes to stormwater runoff. It limits chemical pollution as bioswales naturally clean or filter out oil and metals. Reduces stormwater, allows further runoff to reach the plants, which increases and improves habitat and biodiversity. Relating this to the 3 pillars for environment, we have create connected habitats, as well as filtrating metals and oils. Economy, you could potentially increase consumers. The better the city looks and the parking lot looks, you could draw people to the city, and that goes with society for increased human health. Studies show that when people are around things that is perceived as nature, they just feel better.
So for our summary, what we wanted to recommend was to put in higher minimums for landscaping requirements. And to do this, we wanted to implement more bioswales and rain gardens. We also wanted to, like the landscape group said, emphasize more on native plants, and to also have mandatory sites for natural filtration per number of stalls. And then also to have the minimum requirement for permeable pavements for parking lots with 5 or more spaces increased.
After the conclusion.
All right, in conclusion, we wanted to go over the recommendations of all 4 teams. So the first research topic is landscaping. Our recommendation was to increase point values and percentages of native plants. For the shorelines, they wanted to implement a 35-foot buffer for city property and 25-foot buffer for private property, and then look into incentive programs to offer.
Our permeable pavement group wanted to add within Chapter 14, Stormwater Management, Article 7, titled Best Management Practices, requiring 20% of parking lot surfaces to be permeable pavements. And our design group wanted to recommend to replace planter islands, increase landscaping points needed for urban and riverfront mixed-use areas, and require permeable pavements. Now, these recommendations are investments to move the city of Oshkosh to a more sustainable city in regards to our stormwater management. You've heard our recommendations through our presentation, and our groups will be submitting reports to the Sustainability Advisory Board for your review. Thank you so much for your time, and we will be taking questions now.
Well done. When you mentioned tall trees, how tall is tall trees?
In the landscaping group,
I believe it's over.
Go, Hannah, go.
I'm pretty sure. Oh, okay. I'm pretty sure tall trees are over 20 feet is the requirement.
And along those lines, you mentioned New York City had stormwater retention cells. Is that basically a small pond?
The case study that we looked at was bioswales, so they mainly are implemented in parking lots and along main streets. So what it is you have, yeah, I can go back to it. What happens is you can implement native grasses, any shrubbery, any tree. Sorry, I'm trying to. Okay, yeah,
But,
mainly for
You
you.
said the retention ponds. Those are basically bioswales that we would install. Sorry.
Thank you.
Alright.
The stormwater retention ponds refer to bioswales and retention mechanisms that we would install into parking lots and replace with to replace some of the unnecessary parking spots that we currently have.
I don't know if this helps, but this is a photo of a bioswale. So you still have all your vegetation covered there along with the soil, but then there's chambers underneath that can store the water so that way it can infiltrate through slowly.
Understood.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Understood that part.
I think he was referring to cells. There was some reference to cells, detention cells. What do you mean by that?
It's probably just a small,
Rikers Island.
small pond.
Oh.
Not a big deal. It was New York and not here.
What?
Well, a detention cell, basically it's just a different terminology for like a rain garden or a bioswale. So just different terminology, just to clear up the confusion.
So I had a question for you. So in your problem definition and why you decided to approach these, was there by chance any calculation of total roof area or estimated total roof area in the city in terms of buildings and runoff, or were you looking specifically at square miles? How did you define your problem?
We mainly only focused on parking lots because we didn't want to fully focus on public and private land. So we were told mainly to only focus on the public land areas and specific to parking lots to look at the design of them and certain materials you can use along with them. So we didn't do any calculations on roofs.
How much area we're talking about in comparison to roof area? Okay. Just curious about that. And then I had another question, and this relates to native grasses. So I guess this is more of a public health question, but in relation to the increase in ticks and Lyme disease and things of that nature, did you see any downside to the native grasses besides the aesthetic, like shoreline obstruction? Any concerns about transmission or pests in that way?
I personally didn't see any in the case studies that we looked at, and anyone that we talked to, I didn't hear about that, but maybe in shorelines?
Shorelines, we did look at a literature review and many other case studies. In those case studies, pest management was not mentioned. That is something we could look at for our report, though.
Thank you.
A clarification on the tall tree question. All that is dictated by the Wisconsin Public Service. In this part of the state, trees can be so high under power lines. That's when you see the tree planting going on in the city. One side may have what are going to be taller trees, and the other side there'll be shorter trees, not to interfere with the power lines.
Sure.
And the other thing with the street sweeping, that is dictated by the DNR to prevent runoff into the storm sewers, which eventually go into the lake. So there's certain things that are dictated that are going to be beyond our control.
Well, I'm really thankful
Sort
that
of,
you
not
dispelled
totally.
the myth of the climate being an issue with permeable pavements. I've kind of been asking those questions for a while, and I think probably is late as 10 years ago, there was discussion about, well, we have clay soil and it's too cold and we can't. But now we actually have 4 areas of the city that, we have done that. It would be interesting for us to look at how successful those areas that we have used it have been for our own case study. Thank you.
I also have a question regarding, related to that, because we were looking into that for places around the park and permeable pavement, and we actually really wanted to implement that in the shoreline restoration project where we just got a bench and a little, there's pavement there now, which is kind of against what we were trying to do, is adding more impervious surface right there by the water. But one of the concerns was ADA requirements, and that we wouldn't be able to meet those if permeable pavement got clogged. And so if someone, had a wheelchair and they needed to get through there, if something was clogged, they might not be able to get through, and we have to be able to have that accessible to everybody. So is that something that you guys found in your reports at all?
When you say clogged, do you mean where they're not able to filter waters easily?
Right, because you mentioned, you have to do different things like vacuum it out, at different times if, they become clogged. So I would assume that'd be any kind of debris that would try to filter through that can't filter through in those areas. And then that could, create a problem, I guess, with it being a completely smooth surface that would meet ADA requirements.
Yeah, there is that slight downfall with the permeable pavements in general. Some of the pavements are better with that. Permeable pavers that we found are a little better at not clogging. But in general, that's if they do get clogged, the cleaning of them is definitely necessary. But if there's going to be a pavement surface there and it gets clogged, it's basically as if you were having a impervious surface there, which if you did put pavement there is, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it could be looked at as the same thing. But if it doesn't clog and gets clean, then it should work and function properly.
I just had one more follow-up question. Did you guys look at all at Grasscrete as one of the other products? Did you come across that in any of the case studies? They're kind of like the larger pavers that are like concrete squares, but there's like maybe designs or holes or things like that grass can actually grow up through, but it provides that. Did you look at that?
We didn't
come
look too
across
much
that?
into that. No, the pave drain that we looked a lot into, and actually he was one of the stakeholders that we talked to. Those are the bigger pavement blocks.
But they're solid.
Yes, they are solid. Yes.
I asked because I noticed a couple of driveways like down in River West area, Milwaukee, in the last few years that, the concrete or the asphalt driveway was removed and they had like a 2-track with utilizing that Grasscrete, which, for a little more pervious area is kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, there are other. We just mentioned the 3 most popular permeable pavements. There are other options as well.
So years ago, in the olden days, a lot of driveways were just the 2 strips of concrete and then grass in the middle. And I think, you don't see that anymore, to my knowledge. It's just one big strip of concrete.
I remember my grandparents telling me about that.
My grandparents. It's the wisdom over years, all these things you tuck back here. But I think from the city standpoint, one of the easier things to do is, the point values, increasing those, and native plants and so forth.
And actually, if you don't mind, that piggybacks off of the question I was going to ask. And by the way, thank you for the presentation. You guys did a fantastic job. I imagine the hard work that went into it, so thank you again. But piggybacking off of what he just mentioned, does your group maybe suggest a increase or a complete change to the point system that we currently use, or is it more of a reallocation of where the points are coming from to meet those standards?
Do we have someone from the landscape that could talk about that?
From the landscaping team and the shorelines and design as well, we're looking for a reallocation of the point system, not a whole revamp of it. That would take a lot of time and effort and probably a lot more going into it when we can just make slight changes.
And from like the design team, we were looking more to just like reallocate where the points are going, where they're coming from, increasing them just to try to increase the amount of green infrastructure that's like created around the city and the parking lots and stuff.
Thank you.
Cody.
Adam?
Yeah, no, no.
Hi.
Yeah, so quick question on back to the permeable pavements. You mentioned a UC Davis study. Correct. Did they use California weather for that study? Did you catch that, or is that just like a giant average across, regardless of weather?
That was over an entire study period, I think, from 2011 to 2015. So that was every rain event that occurred from 2011 to 2015 at the University of California, Davis.
Okay, so presumably our benefits in Wisconsin might be higher than what
True,
they,
exactly.
from their study?
We also, in the report, have results from University of New Hampshire, which has a very similar climate and amount of snow. They actually get more snow than us. So there will be more numbers on multiple case studies in the report.
Do we have any other questions?
One other question. In your research, are there other areas that you looked at that have as large of a body of water that Oshkosh does? It's not just the city of Oshkosh, it's, you know, all the lakes, the rivers that flow into the body of water, then up to Green Bay. That probably makes us unique compared to cities where they have a very self-contained body of water. Did you look at those practices? And again, the agriculture has a huge impact on Lake Winnebago.
The case study that the landscaping group had looked at was Prairie Crossing in Illinois. So again, that was a very similar ecosystem and community size. The lake was approximately the size of like the water bodies that we have in Oshkosh, including like different rivers and streams coming through. So what they did is a pretty massive restoration project of their wetlands and prairies, which helped to mitigate some of that stormwater runoff. They, I believe, had restored 200 acres of their prairie and wetlands, so that might be a little bit excessive for Oshkosh. But overall, showing how their water quality is a lot better than like the Fox River, it does show how effective implementing some of these landscaping techniques can be.
And I guess for frame of reference, 200 acres would be about 2 lakeshore golf course sizes.
Or 2 Menominee Parks.
Or 2 Menominee Parks.
Any other questions?
Did they have a lake as well, just out of curiosity?
Yeah,
You
it is a
mentioned
lake. Yep, a lake, rivers, streams, the whole business.
But probably smaller in size, I would imagine. a little bit,
I'm
or-
not sure exactly what the acreage is. It will be in the report. For more specific numbers that I don't have off the top of my head.
I'm just curious about that, and if it's, man-made versus natural, where, we kind of have some interesting issues because we have, it's a little bit more man-made. It's really
Yeah, I believe it is a little bit more natural in comparison to Oshkosh, but they do still have agricultural lands and some of those influences that we see similar to Oshkosh.
and the same kind of uses like boat usage and different things like that.
Would that include industrial?
I am pretty sure they did have some industrial buildings on the lakeshore, but I will have to look into that, and it should be in the report too.
I hope you get a lot of publicity on this, because part of your education is helping the community appreciate the value of what you do. Your grandmother may not have known all of this. One of the books
your
that you
grandmother.
may have read is by Carl Pope from the Sierra Club and Michael Bloomberg, who's the mayor of New York City, and the book is, I think it's Geography of Hope, and stresses in several chapters how much New York City benefited from their sustainability efforts. Really interesting and helps this kind of argument.
And then, Lexi, so this is not a fair question to ask you.
Okay,
So it's
I'm
more
ready.
for your report when you finalize it. I would be interested in knowing. So you've guys, I think I've had most of the ES majors at this point. So you've heard me talk about limited resources. There's a lot of good ideas. You can't pursue them all at once, right? So you need to develop some sort of pecking order. of the 4 that you recommended, where could we have the biggest impact? And you don't need to answer now. Just like when you get to your report, and you probably might have to squabble about it amongst yourselves, right? But which one? Where could we get the biggest bang?
Well, I might be a little bit biased because I am the landscaping part of the landscaping group, but I really do think that implementing native plants around the city is a super viable option because native plants have evolved with the ecosystem. You're not going to have those maintenance costs, extra water, no pesticides are needed. You might have to deal with some invasive species management, but overall those are natural plants that grow in this area that are cost effective and don't require a whole lot of maintenance after they are planted. But the other groups may disagree with me.
Excellent answer, though, I must say. Anyone else, anything? Well, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the council for attending and other city people that are here and others. You're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting. It's not nearly as exciting as what we've already had, I have to tell you. But everybody's always welcome at our meetings. And other than that, I guess we'll just sit back and wait for your report. Let's give them a big hand. Lots of pointers, John. Do you want lots of pointers?
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you, Missy. Thank you all.
Thanks for coming, John. Appreciate it. Hey, Mark. We'll be in touch.
I'll see you Wednesday. Council meeting tomorrow.
Yep.
Nice job.
We don't have a comprehensive plan on Wednesday, do we?
Not sure, actually.
He's not talking about that.
No, biggest landmarks.
Okay, well, we're back to just us. And back to our agenda. Phew, that was good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Did you have lots more questions that just, I did.
Oh,
all the way
we're going to
through.
have a talk on
I'm
Wednesday
anxious to-
when we get together in class, because they didn't do some things that they didn't incorporate my stuff. Things that we talk about in class, things too from policy, they didn't incorporate it. Makes me sad a little bit. But
I had actually heard the same thing from another instructor in the department, so later.
Yep.
Okay.
Why don't we close the door? Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next thing on our agenda is revisions to urban chicken keeping and beekeeping ordinances. And these did go out in the packet, whether you access that online or got it mailed to you. Just for my own education, because I don't remember, how many of you are receiving hard copies? Michelle, do you
think
get one, Lurton?
Yeah.
Okay, and you get online, okay. And everyone with the link, we're doing fine with that, right, as far as accessing what we need when we need it? Okay, good. Just wanted to double check. So the revisions to the urban chicken keeping and beekeeping ordinances, I think maybe, Stephen, you might want to give us a little background on this first, why this is on here?
Oh, sure. Let's see if I can. So basically, the reason I'm bringing these forward, both these ordinances, is because we've had a number of property owners come in applying for beekeeping permits, and chicken keeping licenses. And recently, a number of we can start with the chicken keeping owners first. One of them stopped in, and she had issues basically obtaining consent from the neighboring property owners, because one requirement in the current ordinance is that you have to obtain consent from all abutting property owners. So you could have 4 or 5 property owners around you, and if one says no, that's it. And there's no appeals process, none of that. So we want to bring the chicken keeping ordinance more in line with the beekeeping ordinance, and the beekeeping ordinance right now requires notification only. So that was what staff was thinking about. That was the first part in regards to the chicken keeping ordinance. The other comments that I had, when I look at chapter 6, which is the municipal code chapter that deals with animals in general, the beekeeping ordinance is in there pretty neatly. It's in there in pretty much one section that's devoted to that, to beekeeping in general. The chicken ordinance is broken up into separate sections. So they are kind of close, but you have to look, like cruelty to animals is one section that mentions basically the coops and what those have to be, the sizing, other considerations. But then you have to go in there and you have to look, section 6-8 talks about the limit of the number of animals. So you have to know where to look to find out about the consent requirement. So that's another section of the chicken keeping ordinance. So it's not very neatly, in my opinion, listed in this chapter so that somebody could intuitively find it. You have to kind of look and hunt for it. So what I was kind of thinking in my mind is maybe we could look at consolidating it like the beekeeping ordinance so that there's a section just on chickens. But I would have to talk to other staff. I'd have to talk to the city attorney. I think the more important issue with the chicken ordinance is looking at potentially requiring only notification rather than consent. So that was what I had on the chicken ordinance. The beekeeping ordinance, there was two things. One was, right now our permitting period is January 1st through December 31st.
As it is for all animals.
As it
Cats,
is, yeah.
dogs, chickens.
And one of the property owners that came in was concerned because he came in, I think in January, but his concern was that he wasn't sure if his bees were going to make it through the winter, and here he was looking to renew in January. So his idea was maybe changing it to maybe April 1st through March 31st. That was the rationale he gave, was he just wasn't sure if renewing it that early, if the bees would make it through the rest of the winter. So that was just something that he came to us with.
15?
15, I believe.
$15, I think, yeah.
Per hive or total?
Just total.
Just to be on the record,
Yep.
basically, as being a bee owner.
Yep, to get your
Flat
permit,
rate.
your
Okay,
license.
so it's not a huge expense.
No.
Expense, but it's not like.
Not a huge, no.
So the issue, so if the bees didn't make it through the winter, he was thinking maybe he wouldn't get another
Yeah.
hive, something like that.
Yep. I think that was what he wouldn't renew then.
Cat licenses are March 31st, I thought.
I read the whole thing today. I'm pretty sure they start June 1st.
The little notice you get, June 1st or January 1st? The little notice that you
January
get says
1st.
you have to pay up by March sometime.
Yeah, or else you get an additional fine, but it's actually open on the 1st, I think, license
Oh,
fees.
but you don't actually have to pay it till.
Prior to January 1st of each year, the sum of $5 for each cat or dog. Oops.
I know, they
No.
took my money. I went down in March and I gave them my money and there was no discussion as to why you're late.
In the
I-
event such
I think
license
the
fee
notice I
is
got-
not paid prior to April 1st or within 30 days of acquiring
Oh.
ownership, then they give you an additional fine. So
Okay.
that's why you'd get a notice in March.
Yeah, or
'Cause
you
you
get a
hadn't
notice
yet.
and you save it, mark it on your calendar and go, yeah, okay, I guess I just pay attention to when I have to pay by. So bee owners have to pay sooner than cat owners, or?
Right now, everybody has to pay prior to January 1st for the upcoming year. What we're suggesting is that
But I didn't have to pay prior to January 1st.
well, that's when you're supposed to pay it.
Yeah.
Because you didn't, you got a little thing in the mail saying that if you don't pay by
There
March.
was a
No, I didn't get
reminder.
anything in the mail. I think it came with income taxes or something. I don't know. I asked about.
Well, they probably don't know you
If
have a
they-
cat. If you'd
No, they know
stop,
I have a
if
cat.
you'd stop trying to claim that cat on your taxes.
No, they know I have a cat. No, they stopped sending out postcards. They used to send out postcards telling you, and they stopped that.
Well, at any
I've
rate-
been paying for cat licenses for years, and I never pay before January.
It's under
I'm sure.
section 6.4 licenses
Okay,
and
well,
fees,
maybe
if you
the
want to look
actual
that up.
application of
Yeah.
it, though, is different. I mean, I don't know, the actual application of it's different. I mean, I could go find the little notice. And I don't think they sent out a separate notice. I think it just came with income tax.
Okay, now we're gonna put cats to the side and we're
Okay,
gonna go
but
back
I'm
to
just
chickens
saying-
and bees.
I know, but I'm just saying, in terms of the actual application, does he actually have to pay before January 1, or he could pay in March anyway? Of course, when does he know if his bees are gonna live?
That's the thing. He had said that he wanted more time,
Mhm.
basically.
Okay.
So going into, March, April.
He just made the recommendation that we consider changing the date for the bees.
Yep.
What we don't know is if, because we haven't really run this by the city clerk yet or anything, is if that would cause them any hardship in figuring out when
And actually, I talked
Did you
to,
have a chance to-
I didn't talk to the clerks, but I did talk to Darren, so my supervisor. And in his opinion, it would only really involve us because we're the ones that issue the permits in planning.
Okay.
So he didn't see an issue with changing the permitting period from his standpoint.
Okay. So that's something we can consider.
Yes, it sounds like we can.
Your argument with there is a difference between bees and chickens in terms of noise and if the neighbors complain or not. I can see where you simply notify neighbors if you have bees. If you have chickens, and it could be more of a problem.
Lurton, we went round and round about
We did
this
that.
before the chicken, you were on the board at the time,
Oh,
right,
yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah.
And what happened was before the chicken, urban chicken keeping ordinance was adopted, my argument was that chickens are no more problem next door than dogs. I mean, I've lived next door to a barking dog for
Yes.
large periods of my life.
What's the limit on the number of chickens? It's pretty small.
4.
isn't it?
4, yep.
Yeah.
Why
Okay.
why are neighbors not giving permission?
Well, the one actually, so the property owner that came in and applied and asked me about the whole consent thing, when her issue was, her neighbor, I guess, said that he was afraid his dogs were gonna see the chickens and that they were gonna, it was gonna distract them or they might go after them or something. But basically, he was concerned about his dogs and then seeing her chickens on her side of the lot line. And she had told me that she would have put her coop on the far side of her garage so that you wouldn't be able to see the chickens, but he still, I guess, that was
They're
his
not,
rationale.
they have to be enclosed within a fence of some kind, don't they?
They do have to be in the coop, and that has to be approved by our department.
Uh-huh.
Has to meet the setbacks, has to make, we have to make sure that it complies with the ordinance.
I think that was one of the downfalls, I think, when we came up with the chicken ordinance, is that we did have to receive permission because it seems so strange. It's the only kind of creature, that we are permitting that, you have to get consent from all of your abutting properties. I think it makes a lot more sense to just do the notification, much like bees. I think that's just common sense.
I was against the permission thing then, and I still am, unless we also extend that to dogs, cats, and everything else.
Yeah, it's got
Maybe
it's one or
kids,
all.
too.
Like it's one or all at this point. Honestly, it just seems a little.
So I would definitely recommend that we do try to change that from the permission to notification.
Sure.
But Lurton has some more to say.
No, do you want a motion so we can move on and?
Yes, I do. Can you make a motion?
Sure. All that.
Okay, got that?
I'll second.
So for the chickens, the motion on the table is that we recommend that the chicken ordinance be changed from permission from abutting property owners to merely notification of abutting property owners. Let's take these one at a time. So that would be our recommendation for the chicken ordinance. We've got a motion on the table. Discussion, anyone? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. That was easy. Did anybody see a concern with changing the dates for the bees that you would want to be making? Okay.
The only thing I was thinking of, just because I work in administration, and I just know if you just have that one that's different, and you have to remember that those ones have to go at that time, it can cause an issue with just causing more time and effort to be spent to separate it out and to do those things at that time versus with everything else at the other time.
That was my concern too.
And
yeah.
it's only $15. I mean, not to say that that's maybe not a burden to some, but I just think that if you're invested and you really are serious about having bees and you're going to make all these improvements, you're going to build all these things specific to what the city says, and I would think that you would want to, that's when you commit, and that's when you would sign anyway. So if that's what you want, then I would think that you would.
Hives cost more than $15.
Exactly.
Correct.
I mean, if you're going to go all in and you want to get a license, if you want to build all this specific to the city's requirements, then I would think if you had a problem with your hive, then you would try again, perhaps, if this is something that you really wanted the city. That's just my.
So we don't need to change. So we don't really need a motion.
Correct.
The only,
Unless there's interest here.
Unless someone really disagrees.
How many people asked for changing the date?
Not many, maybe one. I mean, we get like a very small handful of people that apply. I think for beekeeping permits, we might have like 4 or 5. In chicken, we may have like
It's not that many
9.
permits anyway.
No.
And what happens if they don't pay it on time?
Well, then we could go out and do enforcement action if we had to. There's been so few that we haven't gone out there yet, but we could go out there and, you know, if they had to be removed, you know, the bees, or if, you know, we needed to add on the additional fee or whatever, we could, but there's generally been so few that we haven't had to confront that yet.
Oh, and it was more renewal than actual starting, right?
Yep,
Is
it
that
was.
the concern? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Start any time.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
That you would
Bees are
renew.
dormant over the winter, aren't they? The bees are.
That was the
I'm not
point, that
sure,
the,
yeah.
wasn't sure if the
Right.
bees would last.
Right, but
Gotcha.
you can't tell.
Correct, until spring.
There'd be no easy way to tell if the person actually had live bees or not until spring, right?
But there'd still be intent for
Okay.
beekeeping.
Right.
They can come in
Right.
and renew it whenever they want, for that matter, obviously. Was there anything else about the chicken ordinance that we wanted to deal with
Consolidating
at this point?
Chicken, I don't think so, unless, you know, if we as staff can play around with maybe organizing it in that chapter. Potentially we could, just to make it more intuitive for people. It's not the end of the world, perhaps, the way it is. I could see it either way.
I understand why you would be interested in doing that, but that's probably more of a staff issue than
Yeah.
a board issue anyway, right?
The only other thing I had with either ordinance was the beekeeping ordinance. I know one of the people that came in and applied for renewal, I think the same person that mentioned the date change, he mentioned a potential, what he saw as a contradiction between the graphic that we include with the ordinance and the text of the ordinance. So, talking about the flyway barrier, I think it's pretty clear in the graphic that it has to be a minimum of 6 feet tall, so that's pretty clear. But where it says, it shall be located within 5 feet of the hive, and shall extend at least 3 feet on either side of the hive. He was a little confused because we look at this graphic and then it says 5 foot max, which makes sense, but then 5 foot minimum on either side. So what I was thinking about was potentially amending the graphic so that, and the text, so with the text we would say located within 5 feet of the hive entrance, to make it clear that the entrance of the hive has to be within 5 feet of the barrier.
That's the important part.
Yep. And then just changing the graphic so that instead of saying 5 foot minimum on either side of that hive, it would say 3 foot minimum. Just like the text does.
Basically making everything match up.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
what we want, so.
Solid.
Otherwise, I think, I am not aware of anything else in this ordinance that I saw as a concern.
And I did read the whole thing, Stephen. I was so proud of myself. And I hadn't marked anything additional either, so.
Oh, good.
But you're right, I did mark everywhere where it said chicken, and it is kind of all the way through, whereas the
yeah,
bees
there.
is all together, so.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, well then I believe we're done with our revisions to urban chicken keeping and beekeeping.
Do we as a board, do you as a board want the small text and graphic amendment that I'm proposing for beekeeping? I don't know if you want to make a motion on that too, or.
We need a motion for that, to change that.
It would be good, I
Okay.
think, just to have action.
Did I hear a motion?
I would move to change per the staff's recommendations so that the graphics match the text.
Sure.
A
Great,
second?
thanks.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Righty. Okay, anybody else have anything on that? Okay. The next thing is our Wisconsin Green Tier score sheet discussion and action. And I just have to show you all something I'm very proud of, because Stephen and I did this afternoon. I made a Venn diagram of, isn't this awesome? This is a Venn diagram of us and Green Tier, the Green Tier Legacy, and all the other entities that we interact with, like UWO and the Health Department. And so it's like we're kind of involved with a lot of things, as we'd always known, but it was kind of neat to actually see it on paper, because I was getting confused over who knew who and who did what. And you know, who's dating who today, you know? So anyway, having shown you my cute graphic, I'm gonna turn it over to Stephen to talk a little bit about what our discussion and action should be about here with the Green Tier score sheet. Just, you all have this, right? You've seen this? Okay. And the action you would like us to take is to actually,
If there's any goals in there, I know there's a couple that we were working on that we'll get to. I know one of them, the terrace tree thing, is on the agenda. But then, if there's anything that anybody sees in here that you as board members think that we can start working on for this year coming up, it'd be great to have those, to mark those down. I can include them in the score sheet. There's a few things on here I have to update, but if we can include those on the score sheet and then start working towards those, so that in like next year or future years, we can start to, we're showing progress. Because that's the idea of Green Tier, part of it, is to use that baseline that this establishes. And I think even in the past year, we've seen a few points worth of progress, but to keep going with it in terms of sustainable initiatives. So I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at this. I know I need to look at it a little bit more myself, but if anybody has any recommendations for things that we may not be doing already that we want to go after.
In terms of priority of things to go after, maybe when we get to our update, our 5-year update or whatever, that could be reflected on this. Rather than do this first, I'd rather do what we've done for our update on.
complete our update
Okay.
and keep moving on that, and then seeing how that pertains back to this.
Right.
Do we have any kind of timeline, Stephen, on submitting this again?
No, it's
Or-
supposed to be every year. I'll submit it to the DNR, to Will Erickson there, who administers this program.
Mhm.
I can submit this anytime, and then I'm supposed to submit an annual report for what we're doing, so I can do that. But there's nothing like binding. It's just that it is nice to show progress to make sure we're
And can
doing
we
something.
submit more than once a year? I mean, can we continually update?
Oh, I believe so.
I think
I'm
so,
sure.
too.
Yeah. They're not very binding in terms of you absolutely have to do this or that. They do have guidelines, and they, of course, like to see us engaged with them and making progress, but it's not legally binding, so to speak. So we can submit a number of times, or we can hold off, like Lurton was suggesting, and I can submit this, and then we can hold off for establishing new goals beyond, if we want to focus on our plan update.
You said there'd been some updates on this?
There have been.
Do you remember what they were? I mean, I know we didn't do the vehicle idling, for example.
Yeah, and I think so. 2016 we had, and then 2018. There's a few more points for 2018 than what we had from 2016, 2017. Not too many, but there's a few more things that we were working on or have done that we were not doing earlier.
Oh, that's progress.
Yep. It's not like we haven't done anything. We have.
Okay, so really what you would like us to do is look this over and make sure that anything that we want to work on for this year that's on here, we have down already in our action plan.
That'd be good. Yep.
I don't know if anybody had had a chance to look this over ahead of time, and
I skimmed it and I tried to print it, but wasn't successful in printing it.
And I know we've looked it over a few times and talked about it a lot, and I think Lurton had a good idea. I think it's great. One of our big things this year is redoing or updating our sustainability plan. And if we look at our chapter and see, what we can implement here, maybe we could kind of focus on those things, or, maybe implement them in our revisions and can kind of add that, to the
so it's
goals.
kind of deciding which is the horse and which is the cart.
Well, the plan, I think
Yeah.
would be the,
Okay.
horse, you can drag this along as the cart.
Thank you.
One thing might help there, I know every time I look at it, I always notice something new where it's kind of like, aren't we already doing that
Yep.
before? So it might be
Yep.
just, I'm all in favor of working on the sustainability plan first, prioritizing that with like
Continuing to
Lurton said,
update
right? But it might be worth just looking it over and flagging things for Steve, just like, I think we're already doing this, Steve, man, let's.
If we are, for sure, I'd
Yeah.
appreciate that, because I don't know everything. I think Lizzie, who was my predecessor, had a lot more in her head in terms of what the city was doing. So, I know of a few things, but certainly if you know of something that I haven't listed on here.
And I guess I have a special request for Jason and Michelle, just because of where you work. If you see things on here that is already happening within the city limits, and that we could tag on to as far as this is happening, and we can take the points for that. Please help us be aware of that, because you may see things that we didn't. So maybe next time you look it over with that in mind, that might be helpful too. And of course, the reason we want this is so we can get grants and stuff, right?
Yep, that helps.
Yeah. Well, and because we want a better quality of life for everyone in the city, of course. Okay, did anybody have anything else on the green tier score sheet okay. The next thing on the agenda is the Environmental Leadership Award, which we've been looking at for a while. And Stephen wrote an awesome proposal. Did y'all read it?
Actually, Ken Friedman helped, and I think Vicky helped with it, Vicky Redland, so.
Okay.
And then I think the board members commented at the March meeting, if I remember correctly.
So you guys I wasn't here in March, was I? Okay, so you guys already saw this, and all we need to do then is just approve it as is, unless there's changes?
If you have any changes, otherwise, if you wanna,
Awesome,
I
okay.
think we ought to approve it as is, and then we can modify it if we find out there are problems once we've gone through it one cycle.
Sure, sounds good.
So move.
Question first, sorry. So is the timeline?
Well, wait. He moved the.
Okay, sorry.
Approve as is. If we have a second, then we can discuss it.
Okay.
So, did I hear a second?
We're
Okay.
just gonna sit here staring at each other.
Now,
I
Michelle.
backtrack, you need a second to discuss.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's not on the table until then.
Okay.
okay.
Good to know. Okay. So, May. I guess this is a draft award cycle. I just was wondering if we're also approving the timeline that's at the bottom, because we're kind of a month behind since we didn't have an April meeting. So I'm wondering, are we,
Yeah, our timeline had shown that the SAB and the city would approve the proposal in April, and because we didn't meet, we couldn't pass it on to the city.
Right.
So the question is, do we need to move the entire timeline down a month?
Correct.
Which we can certainly.
What we
Or
have for
adapt
May
it.
is market award via publication on SAB webpage and through personal contacts, emails, and selected media. Given that it's only May 7th, there's a good chance we could still accomplish that and catch up with our timeline.
Okay.
Does that feel overwhelming to anyone? Anyone that would be doing it, Stephen?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I could work with people here in, subcommittee, or I could work with Rotary, and, if we have to coordinate some of the logistics of it, and getting this award, published and all that.
Well, and we also have down that we're accepting applications through July 31st, which is still pretty far out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think if we were to
So-
shift this timeline down, that's a good point. That makes sense, because we are behind at this point. So we could certainly do that.
Well, and I guess I'm questioning if we need to,
Yeah.
because between now and July 31st is still June, July. That's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we could even just, accept applications in July if we had to advertise more in June, or we could do both. We could accept them in June as well and still advertise in June.
Well, I think
if
we'll
we
start
weren't able to
accepting
do
them
it
as
in
soon as we
May.
advertise them, won't we? Because we have them ready to go, correct?
Well, it says that we're accepting them June through July, but we're starting advertising in May.
5 or 6.
Five, I think.
But I was just thinking, we probably have to have city approval to then start marketing it. So I just want to make sure we could get city approval within this month, if that's possible yet.
We should be able to.
We
I
need
can,
one to- Yeah.
and I would talk, I'll talk to whoever I need to.
Well, we should be able to hit the last one of the month, the last council meeting for sure.
Oh, sure.
So roll,
That's cool, that's
so
just-
roll with the timeline for now, and then if amendments need to be made, that can be decided next month, is what I'm hearing. Because we have to make sure we can get the city approved first,
We have to be sure we have the city approval to go through with it.
Just summarizing.
Roll with it, for
So we
now.
roll with
Hopefully
it
we can
as is.
still,
Okay.
go with it as is. If we need to adapt it later in June, we can.
So all in favor of accepting the Environmental Leadership Awards proposal as written with the timeline as shown?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next thing, terrace tree proposal. Gee, have we ever heard this before, Michelle, huh? Put it. Oh, this is what you wrote. This came from Stephen directly. I knew when I read stuff that one of them had.
And Bill Sturm actually helped crafting a lot of this, but then he just sent it to me. I looked at it, and then I added a few things, and so.
And now we're okay, we're approving this so that it can go on to the city manager to go to the council. Is that correct?
That'd be the idea.
Okay.
You take action.
Okay.
Unless you have any changes that you want done.
Did everybody have a chance to look at this?
So this is just the memo asking for the plan? Is that
Yes, the
correct?
background and the
So
recommendation.
it's a formal request for.
Yep.
Give us a detailed plan.
Yes, it's our board is basically requesting that some internal department probably, some internal department would go ahead and write it and push it through council then.
What would
Wow.
motion to approve, or
Okay.
you want to change it? Anybody want to change it? If not, I move approval.
I would
Give me a
second.
Second.
Okay.
I'll
Have that
second.
one?
Is there discussion on this at all, anyone? Okay.
No, let's do it, please.
Okay,
Well-written
yes.
and
All in
concise.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
I liked it.
Right.
And thank you, Stephen.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks
Very
to
much
Bill
so.
also.
Yeah, he did a lot of work, so.
And all the students that put work
All the
into that
students
as
that
well.
worked on that
Yep,
before
they
and,
did too.
and the people who had written it 5 years ago.
Previously.
No big.
Guess who that was? Yeah. Okay, next on our agenda is the farmer's market update, which we have our 4 dates.
Mm-hmm. We do. So it sounds like we've been assigned the space N12 on June 2nd, July 14th, August 11th, and September 8th. I don't think we ever picked, or I don't know, I might have taken down names for volunteers. I think Robert might have said.
Robert loves to do the farmer's market and he's good at it, so we really appreciate that, but I hate to have him have to do it all by himself.
I can't remember
So-
if we set it in stone as to who committed. I know people kind of said, that certain dates work better and that
Okay.
they'd be willing, but
That happened at the March meeting also?
might have been earlier, actually, February.
No, you were there.
Might have been February, I think, because.
Yeah, we just threw out like dates that worked best for us. So I just mentioned that I work every other weekend.
Okay.
So the June.
I
2nd
didn't
date
remember
works.
having had the dates until I saw this.
No, we didn't have them confirmed, but we had put like
Okay.
requests essentially for dates that work better for
Okay.
variety.
Of those 4 dates, we're on Church Avenue, I'm guessing, is where Ann is.
One time we were on the 400 block when I was there for at least a little bit. with
They're
Robert.
doing the entire downtown market differently this year a little bit, and I think they have all the city spots on Church Avenue, but I could be wrong.
Are we in the same
Really?
spot consistently? Correct. That's what I
Oh,
was.
if it's
Yes.
N12
Yep.
though, yeah, it's just
Okay.
around the corner, yeah.
I'm definitely in for June 2nd.
North is gonna be, N's gonna be north of Church Street, I think. Does it go N above and S below?
Whatever better.
Well, at any
Yeah,
rate,
I'm
well,
trying to-
we'll find the spot, but are there any dates that, and let's just say if there are any dates that you're able to participate and to help. I'm kind of, Robert wasn't able to be here because he's ill tonight, but I'm kind of assuming he's going to be interested in doing all the dates. But if there are any dates that you would like to assist either for part or all the time, can you maybe just let Stephen know so he can coordinate that?
Of course.
Excellent. Okay, Michelle, babe, you're up. Menominee Shoreland Restoration. Give us an update.
Sure. Been
And you held your
busy.
tongue so well during the presentation. I thank you for that. I did too.
Yep. Well, the hardest one was they mentioned grasses, and we didn't have any grasses until we just planted them. They're talking about tall grasses and all this. Oh, they're all flowers. They're all.
Oh, boy.
But that's so. It's just you
They
gotta
were
let
going,
things go.
they were going by what they were told in their
Yeah,
interviews.
yeah, and I know
Which
I
may
wasn't
have
as
not
available.
been all accurate.
They had asked to talk to me, but I wasn't as available as I would have liked to be. So So I wanted to update. We are unfortunately going to skip the Growing Oshkosh plant sale that we were going to do this year. So we were going to work with Growing Oshkosh. It was an annual thing that we've done where we kind of, or we do go out to their site at Growing Oshkosh and have our own little native plant sale while they're doing their plant sale for vegetables and things like that. And they're holding it last Saturday and then this Saturday. And we were scheduled to do that, but just because of how things worked out this year when our plants weren't, they're not quite up yet. The weather's been kind of crazy and it's just not going to work out right now. But Justin Mitchell has also held a plant sale at his house every June, and he said he's looking forward to doing that possibly this year. So, yeah. As far as I know, once the plants are going, I haven't heard otherwise, I guess, that he still wanted to do a plant sale if he could with our plants that we have previously purchased. So,
But the timing may be a little different than previous
it's just
years
different,
because
yes.
of the-
Because of the weather, plants just aren't that far up yet. They're not pretty, they're not blooming right now. They're very small. So we want to be able to give them more time to, look nice. And
I drove by this morning just to see what it looked like, and I also went by the Nicolay side. Yeah. It's not pretty yet either.
Yeah, no. So it's just not going to work out with timing this year, so we just decided not to participate in that this year, but, keep a watch out. Justin usually posts something in the paper if he's going to have a sale at his house, so that is a possibility. We are doing an additional fundraising event this year that we haven't done previously, so hopefully that will
Do we have a date on that?
We do. Monday, June 25th, we are going to have a night at Benvenuto's. So you stop by Benvenuto's that day and you just mention, you don't even have to have a piece of paper, but you can just mention that you're coming there to be part of the night out at Benvenuto's for the Shoreline Restoration Group, and they will give us a certain amount of the proceeds.
Food and drink.
So, yeah, that's exciting. So that's a first. We're very excited about that. We also have another first this year where Vic was awesome and told Target about our project, and they were excited to volunteer with us. So this year, when we are doing our pathways, we have some wood chipped areas that we have for a trail, and they're going to help us put that in this year. So on Saturday, May 26th, from 9:30 to about noon, we're going to have the Target volunteers there helping us with that. So we're very excited with that partnership, and would love to have any other volunteers come because we'll still need as many hands as we can get. We're going to be wetting cardboard, laying it down where we're putting the trail, and then laying wood chips on top of that. And what that does is provides an extra barrier for weeds and other unwanted growth in the trail area to help out with maintenance throughout the season. And then the wood chips are going to be supplied by the city, and hopefully they'll look as nice as they did last year. That was very, very nice. And we may wood chip a little bit, still some of the viewing area where we haven't planted yet, just to prevent invasive species getting in that area where we don't have other things right now. So we did plant some native grasses. So I'm hoping those come up. We had some third graders come out and plant those last fall. So I'm really excited to see what comes up in that viewing area.
And those have very deep roots, I assume?
Yes, they're grasses that have deep roots. So there was a part of that was true. And we did plant they're short grasses that we are planting in the area.
Short
so.
grasses, long roots.
Yes.
Iceberg grass, got it.
Very good. Yeah. So, that's just some of the things coming up. On June 2nd, we are going to do our first full site trim We had intended to do that last year, but because of timing, again with seasons, it's hard to plan for how the weather's going to be and how plants are going to grow. Last year it was scheduled for June 18th, and it was just too late in the season. We had too many blooms and couldn't do a cut of the whole site to 1 foot, but this year we plan to do that on June 2nd, just trim down to about a foot.
When's the last time you were out there?
I haven't been out this season. I've been kind of out,
You want to
for a
go
while.
look at it.
Yeah.
I think it may have already been mowed.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if they've been mowing it at all. I mean, I wouldn't think they're supposed to just mow it in fall, but I'll take a look at it.
And I know grass and I know tree and I know bush, but that's as far as I go, so I could be dead wrong.
They don't.
I know bird, I know cat.
Well, I mean, they're supposed to work with us for mowing, and they just mow the one time in fall usually, and then in spring but the site, we haven't actually officially opened it for the season, but still, that's the area that's reserved for that stuff, so I wouldn't think.
Well, and it could have
Hopefully
just
it's
been
not.
squished by snowpack or
It could have.
something
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
could just be not coming up right away just because of that, and they may have cleared out more snow because there is that oak trail. They might have moved some of that snow into that area to clear away for the trail. And I know I've looked at some areas recently where there were those huge piles of snow, and they're still looking kind of like, ooh, very pond-like and just, kind of icky. So that could be what happened there too.
For Birdfest on Saturday, we have a big top, the big tent, and then we have a smaller tent. And the big tent is usually where the programming is. Well, it had 4 inches of water, so instead we moved everything to the smaller tent and had very friendly programming. We were all very tightly.
Got very close.
Yes,
nice.
exactly. But it was a beautiful day otherwise. So there was that.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that's all the updates I have for now. It's a lot.
It is a
But
lot.
we're excited to.
Are you still looking for volunteers for dates that you still need help with, or is that pretty much
yeah.
lined up?
Throughout the season, it's always nice to have, different groups contact us. You can contact us, find us on Facebook. Let us know if you are looking for a volunteer opportunity for your group. Or if you have any groups that you think might be interested, let me know if you have a contact that I should reach out to. Because we do like to have different groups come throughout the season. We usually have one Saturday a month right now scheduled, and some of the ones later in the summer can be flexible. But we like to have a different volunteer group come out, those Saturdays. It's just one Saturday a month just to, get different people exposed to it, have a few extra helping hands. So those are opportunities. We could use a group. Obviously, target is going to be May, but June, July, August, those would be helpful, those 3 months.
And of course, if any of the previous volunteers want to keep coming back, that's okay too.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. Thanks so much. That was awesome. Okay, agenda items for future meeting. Anything that's not currently on our agenda that we're going to roll over to anything else?
I will have an update next month on the vehicle idling at the Oshkosh area school districts. The education that we talked about. I finally have the right contact person. That was fun.
Okay, so we'll put
So that
vehicle
I
idling on
definitely
there.
have like a firm update next
Okay,
time.
sure.
Okay.
We may do something on the sustainability update,
Mhm.
the land use and the economic development.
Yep.
You're saying that you want that definitely on the agenda as opposed to just in a workshop? Or whatever. Okay, got it. Has anybody else made some progress on their chapters?
I started editing last night. If
Oh,
I have
Lord.
some questions, good for me. You probably wonder when I wrote all my term papers. Actually, chem students don't have to write too many term papers, just land reports, but those are easier.
You just mix up things in vials, right? And if they don't blow up, you pass?
Well, you have to describe what you did, but it's very straightforward to write a lab report. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay,
I
well,
probably do have questions, but we're doing a workshop.
so our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, June 4th. We're all going to be here, right?
God willing.
Yep, God willing, and the creek don't rise. Yep. Okay, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Standing vote?
All in favor, let's do it.
Aye.
Aye.